Welcome to Archive Vault, where we explore declassified records, hidden histories, and state-level investigations. Please note, some illustrative narration is AI-generated for storytelling purposes. All content is educational and documentary-based. You are watching the end of a dynasty that ruled for more than 300 years. The Romanovs had governed Russia since 1613. Their rule survived wars, revolutions, and internal unrest. By the early 20th century, however, the empire was fragile. Industrialization lagged behind Western Europe. Workers crowded into cities under harsh conditions. Political reform came slowly. Discontent did not. Tsar Nicholas II believed deeply in autocracy. He saw himself as appointed by God to rule. He resisted constitutional limits on his power. After the 1905 revolution, he agreed to create a parliament known as the Duma, but he retained ultimate authority. Trust between ruler and people was already damaged. Then came World War I. Russia entered the war in 1914. At first, there was patriotic support. That support eroded quickly. Military losses were heavy. Supplies were mismanaged. Food shortages spread through Petrograd and other major cities. Inflation rose. Soldiers at the front lacked equipment. Confidence in the government weakened further. In 1915, Nicholas II made a decision that would tie his fate directly to the battlefield. He took personal command of the Russian army. That left the capital under the influence of Empress Alexandra. Alexandra was German-born, which fueled suspicion during wartime. More controversial was her reliance on a Siberian mystic named Grigory Rasputin. Rasputin entered the Romanov circle because of the heir to the throne, Alexei. The young prince suffered from hemophilia, a condition that caused uncontrolled bleeding. At times when doctors failed, Rasputin appeared able to calm the boy and reduce episodes of bleeding. Whether through suggestion, prayer, or discouraging certain medical treatments, his presence seemed to help. For Alexandra, that was enough. To many in the aristocracy, Rasputin represented corruption and manipulation. Rumors spread that he influenced state decisions. Political elites saw him as a threat. In December 1916, a group of nobles assassinated Rasputin. They believed removing him would restore stability to the monarchy. It did not. By early 1917, strikes erupted in Petrograd over bread shortages. Workers filled the streets. Soldiers were ordered to suppress protests. Many refused. Some joined the demonstrators instead. Authority began to fracture from within. In March 1917, Nicholas II abdicated the throne. He did so not only for himself, but also on behalf of his son. The Romanov dynasty ended in a signed document. The former emperor became a private citizen overnight. Nicholas, Alexandra, their daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their son Alexei were placed under house arrest. At first, they were held at the Alexander Palace. Guards were posted, movement was restricted, correspondence was monitored. The family's world narrowed to a controlled perimeter. As revolutionary forces consolidated power, the Romanovs were moved east to Tobolsk in Siberia. Later, as civil war intensified between Bolshevik forces and anti-communist armies, they were transferred again. In April 1918, they arrived in Ekaterinburg, a city in the Ural Mountains under firm Bolshevik control. The house where they were confined was surrounded by high fences. Windows were painted white to prevent outside visibility. Armed guards watched at all hours. The daughters, including 17-year-old Anastasia, lived inside a structure that no longer resembled a royal residence. It was a holding place. Outside the walls, Russia was collapsing into civil war. Anti-Bolshevik forces advanced from different regions. The possibility of a rescue attempt became a concern for the new regime. The Romanovs were no longer symbols of power. They were symbols of potential restoration. And in a revolutionary government built on eliminating the old order, symbols carried risk. By July 1918, decisions were being made not in public chambers, but behind closed doors. The Romanovs had already lost their throne. What remained to be decided was whether they would survive the revolution that had replaced it. It is shortly after midnight on July 17, 1918. The Romanov family has been asleep inside the Ipatiev house in Ekaterinburg. The guards wake them and instruct them to dress. They are told there is unrest in the city. They are told they must move for their own safety. This is not unusual. They have been moved before. Nicholas carries his son Alexei, who is ill and weak. Alexandra walks beside them. The four daughters follow: Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. A small group of loyal attendants is brought with them. They are led downstairs into a basement room. The space is small. Chairs are requested for Alexandra and Alexei. The others stand. A group of armed men enters the room. They are led by Yakov Yurovsky, the Bolshevik commandant of the house. He reads a short statement. It says that the family has been condemned by the Ural Soviet. It says that because their relatives continue to attack Soviet Russia, the Romanovs are to be executed. Nicholas has little time to respond. Witness accounts differ on the exact words spoken. What is consistent is that gunfire follows almost immediately. The first shots are directed at Nicholas. He falls quickly. The room fills with smoke from revolvers fired at close range. The execution does not proceed as cleanly as planned. The daughters do not die instantly. Unknown to the executioners at first, jewels had been sewn into the bodices of their dresses. The diamonds and gemstones act as barriers, deflecting some bullets. Bayonets are used. Additional shots are fired at close range. The scene becomes chaotic. It takes several minutes to end the violence. When it is over, 11 bodies lie in the basement. The Tsar, the Empress, their 5 children, 4 attendants. The bodies are carried outside before dawn. They are loaded onto a truck. The plan is to hide them permanently. The executioners drive to a remote forested area known as Gnina Yama. The ground is unstable. An initial attempt to bury the bodies in a mine shaft fails. Acid is used in an attempt to disfigure the remains. The bodies are moved again. They are buried in a shallow grave along a forest road. Not all the remains are placed in the same pit. In the days that follow, official announcements are limited. Soviet authorities initially report only that Nicholas has been executed. Information about Alexandra and the children is withheld. Confusion spreads across Europe. Some believe the daughters may have been moved elsewhere. Some believe they may still be alive. The location of the burial site is not publicly revealed. Records are incomplete. Secrecy becomes part of the aftermath. The Romanov dynasty ends in a basement room. But because the graves are hidden, because the full truth is not immediately disclosed, space is left for doubt. And doubt is where survival stories begin. In the months and years after the execution, information moved slowly and unevenly across Europe. The Bolsheviks did not immediately publish full details of what had happened in the basement. Early reports confirmed the death of Nicholas II. The fate of Alexandra and the children was less clearly stated. In an age without instant communication, uncertainty traveled far. Monarchies across Europe had family ties to the Romanovs. Letters were exchanged. Diplomats inquired. Some believed at least one of the daughters might have survived. The burial site was secret. No bodies were presented publicly. No graves were marked. In that silence, possibility expanded. The most famous claimant emerged in 1920 in Berlin. A young woman was pulled from a canal after an apparent suicide attempt. She refused at first to identify herself. Eventually, she told others she was Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolaevna of Russia. She became known as Anna Anderson. Supporters gathered around her. Some former members of the Russian aristocracy believed her resemblance to Anastasia was convincing. They pointed to similarities in facial structure, gestures, and personal mannerisms. Others were not persuaded. Anna Anderson claimed she had survived the execution, rescued by a sympathetic guard. She described hidden jewels sewn into clothing. She recounted fragments of palace life. She insisted she was the youngest daughter of Nicholas and Alexandra. The dispute moved into courtrooms. In Germany, legal proceedings began to determine her identity. The case lasted decades. Witnesses testified. Handwriting was analyzed. Photographs were compared. Some Romanov relatives rejected her completely. Others remained uncertain. No court ever formally declared her to be Anastasia. In 1970, a German court ruled that her identity could not be conclusively proven. Anna Anderson was not alone. Over the decades, more than 10 women across Europe and North America claimed to be surviving Romanov daughters. Each offered variations of escape stories. Some described secret rescues. Others claimed hidden identities arranged by loyalists. None produced definitive evidence accepted by historians. The myth grew larger than any single claimant. Rasputin's earlier presence in the royal court added another layer to the legend. Stories circulated that Rasputin had predicted the fall of the Romanovs. Some retellings claimed he foresaw that if he were killed by nobles, the royal family would also perish. Whether accurate or embellished, these narratives connected mysticism to tragedy. The Romanov story began to merge with prophecy and fate. Throughout the 20th century, the image of Anastasia took on a life beyond court documents. Books were written, films were produced. The idea of a lost princess who survived revolution carried emotional force. It offered an alternate ending to a violent chapter in history. It allowed audiences to imagine escape from a sealed basement room. Yet beneath the storytelling remained the unresolved question: if no graves were officially identified, if the burial site was unknown, could survival still be possible? For decades, the physical evidence remained out of reach. The forest where the bodies had been buried was not publicly excavated. Soviet authorities did not encourage investigation. The official narrative stated that the Romanovs were dead. But the absence of visible remains meant the final proof had not been shown. And as long as proof is unseen, belief has space to breathe. For most of the 20th century, the burial site of the Romanov family remained hidden. In the 1970s, an amateur Russian investigator named Alexander Avdonin located what he believed to be the grave near Ekaterinburg. Because the Soviet government still controlled historical inquiry, the discovery was kept quiet. It was not publicly excavated at that time. In 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the site was officially open. Human remains were recovered from a shallow grave along the forest road. Forensic teams began analysis. The remains did not initially account for all members of the family. 9 skeletons were found. Missing were 2 of the Romanov children. Scientific testing followed. Dental records were compared. Skeletal measurements were examined. Most significant was DNA analysis. Samples were compared with living relatives of the Romanov line, including Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who shared maternal lineage with Empress Alexandra. Mitochondrial DNA testing matched the remains to the Romanov family. The findings concluded that Nicholas II, Alexandra, 3 of their daughters and 4 attendants were present in the grave. 2 children were still unaccounted for. For years, this gap allowed survival rumors to continue. Some believed Anastasia had been the missing daughter. Others believed it was Maria. The absence of 2 bodies sustained doubt. In 2007, a second burial site was located not far from the first. Additional remains were discovered. Forensic analysis was again conducted. DNA testing confirmed that the bones belonged to Alexei and one of his sisters. The combined findings from both graves accounted for all members of the immediate Romanov family who were executed in July 1918. Independent laboratories in Russia and abroad participated in the testing. Results were published and reviewed. The scientific consensus concluded that no Romanov child survived the execution. As for Anna Anderson, DNA testing was conducted after her death in 1984, using preserved tissue samples. The results did not match Romanov lineage. Instead, they matched a Polish factory worker named Franziska Szankowska, who had previously gone missing. The decades-long legal battle over her identity ended with genetic evidence. The official historical and forensic record now supports one conclusion: Nicholas II, Alexandra, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei were all killed in the basement of the Ipatiev house. Their remains were buried in secret and later recovered through modern investigation. Yet the legend persists. The idea of Anastasia surviving became part of cultural memory. It reflected a desire for rescue in a story defined by violence. It thrived during decades when physical proof was hidden. By the time scientific confirmation arrived, the myth had already taken root in literature and film. The empire ended in 1917. The execution occurred in 1918. The graves were confirmed decades later. The evidence is documented. The DNA is archived. The historical record is established. And still, the name Anastasia continues to echo beyond the basement where the dynasty ended. Thank you for listening to Archive Vault Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive and found it insightful. Wishing you a great week ahead, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. We'll be back soon with more stories from the archives. See you next time.